So hi, everybody. It's great to be here and to see so many people. My task is to discuss two sections of the new Health Professions and Occupations Act, or Bill 36. I keep calling it Bill 36. And these are sections that they reach beyond our provincial borders, and essentially what they do is they let the BC government bring in and adopt and enforce laws that are made by foreign jurisdictions. We just had a hint about that in the last talk. And especially they allow the government to bring in laws and rules that have been made by the World Health Organization, or WHO for short. So these foreign laws come down from two instruments that are being prepared by the WHO. One is the Pandemic Treaty. How many people here have heard of the WHO's Pandemic Treaty? Lots of people, yeah, 80% are or so. And then the second instrument that's being prepared by the WHO is the International Health Regulations. So we'll see how these two WHO instruments dovetail with two sections in the Health Professions and Occupations Act. First, to look to the international scene and the Pandemic Treaty. Here is how the Pandemic Treaty is explained on the Canada government website, and the current government is in favor of the treaty, so this is a positive slant, so this is their perspective. Canada is working closely with other countries and international partners to strengthen global pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response. This includes the development of a new World Health Organization convention, which is sometimes called, and then you'll have heard of these names, a pandemic treaty, a pandemic accord, or a pandemic instrument. And the instrument is intended to strengthen and coordinate national and international efforts to prevent, prepare for, and respond to pandemics. So that's the way they present their goal. So this treaty addresses pandemics, or what's also called public health emergencies in the legislation. There's going to be a vote on this treaty on May 24th in Geneva, the upcoming May 24th. And every nation, member nation of the WHO, there's 194 of them, will have a vote. And Canada is one of those member nations. If the treaty is approved in its present format as it's being proposed, these partners include provincial governments. So this is where BC comes in anticipation of ratifying the treaty and bringing it into Canada as part of our law. The feds have been collaborating with the provinces, and my understanding is that BC is kind of one of the poster children of their efforts. So that's the Pandemic Treaty. The second instrument coming down from the WHO that will affect us if we vote for it is the International Health Regulations. So these regulations are general in scope, whereas the treaty deals only with pandemics and public health emergencies. The regulations will cover all healthcare matters generally. Apparently they're also going to cover animal health. I've heard that they're contemplating mandatory mRNA vaccines for animals. Yeah, so that's going to affect our farmers and the food that we eat. It's scary. So the WHO already had international health regulations, but the difference is that before this they were only advisory, and therefore they were not binding. But an amendment is now proposed, and it's being hotly contested by some people in the European parliaments, to upgrade the regulations from non-binding to binding on all member states. So the way that it would work, the way the procedure would flow is this coming May, Canada will vote on the treaty and the new regulations in Geneva, and then if they're approved, they'll become law in Canada, and then under the way our laws are set out, the provinces will become responsible to implement those laws within their borders, hence Bill 36. So the effective result of all this is that the WHO it's become effectively a legislative body for Canada. They're making our healthcare laws even though we don't know the people there. We haven't elected them. We have virtually no power of oversight, and we can't remove them in the next election. They're there and they're making our laws. So to turn back now to our provincial law and to Bill 36, or the Health Professions and Occupations Act, we'll see how the two sections tie in. So the first section is section 3352. And it falls under the public health emergencies part of Bill 36. And it says that in a public health emergency, which would include a pandemic, the provincial health officer, and that's presently Dr. Bonnie Henry, may adopt by reference a regulation, a code is a law, or a standard or a rule that's been enacted in another jurisdiction, including a foreign jurisdiction. So that's bringing in the foreign laws into our province. Or it can bring in a code set by a national or international body or any other body that may make codes. So that's kind of vague. What's an international body? That would most certainly include the WHO, the World Health Organization, perhaps the UN. And what's a foreign jurisdiction? Well, generally speaking, it's probably a foreign country. It could be England or France. I recently heard, some of you may have heard this too, that there's a proposed law on the books, and I haven't verified this, but the source was reliable, that if anyone in France speaks out against the COVID vaccine, if their concerns, doctors that have seen injured patients or whatever, they may be subject to 3-year incarceration and a really hefty fine. What does it mean? It says here that the provincial health officer may adopt by reference these foreign laws. What does that mean by reference? Well, that was a little bit confusing when I first read it, because it says may adopt, but if the laws and the rules are binding, there's no option. So I think that probably what it boils down to is it's making optional the method of adoption. A BC health order might say, we hereby adopt French health order number 95 concerning vaccine advice for healthcare practitioners. So that way, it's just a simple way to refer to the law without having to bring it in, type it out, incorporate it in our ever-expanding legislative binders. And it would make it difficult to research too, wouldn't it? So the second section of Bill 36 is section 533(1), and it essentially says the same thing as section 335, but the difference is that section 335 deals with public health emergencies and pandemics. So this section is the part of the bill that covers general health care. So it would cover everything else, everything. All healthcare matters for people and apparently also for animals. And it can adopt laws from foreign jurisdictions. So we see that section 335 of Bill 36 covers health emergencies, and it dovetails with the WHO pandemic treaty. And then section 533 covers general health care, and it dovetails with the international health regulations. And so this makes a complete package coordinated with the WHO, and it gives teeth to the WHO laws and rules so that they can be enforced in BC. And there's no doubt in my mind that this dovetailing of the sections was purposeful, because the Canadian government said on its website that it was working with the provinces to move the treaty forward. I believe they've also been working with the WHO. Then Bill 36 was pushed through in BC in November 2022, and I'm sure that was partly in anticipation of the work that's being done in Geneva, because they were first going to come up. They first came up for a vote in May 2023. They weren't approved. They went back to the drawing board, and now they're voting on it again in this coming May. So that's that in a nutshell. What are the objections to the new treaty and regulations? Like, what did the critics say exactly? What's wrong? They say that while the goals seem great, they really have grave concerns, and I've distilled their concerns down into 4 main points. And I should say that for this part of my talk, I'm going to be drawing primarily on speeches in the UK Parliament and interviews with 2 UK MPs, Andrew Bridgen and Danny Kruger. So the first concern is that to give lawmaking power to the World Health Organization gives away the sovereignty of the people. It gives away our rights to choose the people who will be making our laws. We don't elect them. And so we need to know just a little bit about who or what the World Health Organization is. It was founded in 1948. It's a sub-agency of the United Nations. It's headquartered in Geneva. It's an unelected body. If they make mistakes, and they do, they cannot be held to account like an elected representative can. So I've coined a term, and I just call them democratically unaccountable. We can't remove them the next time we have an election. Mr. Bridgen said that people should be sovereign over their decision makers, and he's made a well-known quote, "Sovereignty belongs to the people. It's not ours to give away." It's a good one. Also, the bureaucrats, I really learned a lot when I was investigating the WHO. The bureaucrats at the WHO cannot be sued because they live and work in Geneva. They enjoy diplomatic immunity. This I also learned from Mr. Bridgen. They cannot be sued if they make a mistake, even a deadly mistake, and so that makes them legally unaccountable as well as democratically unaccountable. And to sum it up, under Bill 36, the power to make Canadian law is given to unelected and unaccountable bureaucrats who live and work across the ocean in Geneva. So their second concern is that one body, the WHO, becomes the sole arbiter of truth about healthcare and mandates and lockdowns and drugs and medications and science and medicine and everything connected with our healthcare. So power is dangerously centralized with this unelected and unaccountable body. And they also point out the significant threat of wrongful censorship. So the WHO will have the power to say what is misinformation. And any doctor, and we heard this theme in the prior talk, any doctor or scientist who disagrees or who merely asks questions may be censored or punished. And this has already happened. I mean, we've seen this happening, but now it's going to be formally legalized, and I'm afraid it's going to get worse. And these censorship power coordinates with other provincials in Bill 36, which set out the fines and the punishments for doctors and others who go against the government narrative on vaccines and healthcare practices. And then I have a quote from Danny Kruger, the other member of Parliament. One of his primary concerns is that the pandemic treaty and regulations set up the WHO as the single source of truth on vaccines, pandemics, and responses to pandemics. So there's no room for inquiry or debate. It's undemocratic, it's unscientific, it's authoritarian, is what it is. Mr. Kruger also said that and I'm not sure how he arrived at this conclusion, but this is what he said, and he's been looking into it. The regulations propose the creation of a vast public health surveillance mechanism, and his guess was that this mechanism would be largely funded by Big Pharma. So the third concern is issues with the WHO itself. And the critics say it's a compromised agency due to regulatory capture. So regulatory capture happens when an agency comes under the influence or the control of the entities that it's supposed to be overseeing and monitoring. And a really good, powerful example is the NIH in the United States, the National Institute of Health. They're intended to oversee the pharmaceutical industry, but they have become involved in medical research and in obtaining patents, and they receive royalties from the sale of newly patented drugs by Big Pharma. So they have a vested interest in promoting and selling these drugs. So they've been captured, or they've captured themselves, I suppose you might say. They're not independent. They have a vested financial interest in advancing the sales of certain patented drugs. And so some other facts from Dr. Dr. Bridgen is actually a doctor. I should maybe just give a really quick, he hasn't only been a politician in England for well over 10 years. He's a geneticist and a virologist. And he was previously in favor of the mRNA vaccines. He got two himself. But then he began getting calls from concerned constituents, and he began investigating it himself. And so he's now, he's very opposed to the mRNA vaccine mandates, and he knows what he's talking about. And he's also been ousted by his party for talking about it honestly on trumped up charges, but I won't get into that. So what he said is that only about 16% of WHO funding comes from the member states of the organization. About 80% of the funding comes from external sources. And that includes people and groups that are big investors in pharmaceuticals and mRNA vaccine technology, and Bill Gates, I think I heard that name, is one such investor. And so these people and groups have a vested interest in promoting the vaccines and all their patented drugs. So the critics say the WHO has been captured by Big Pharma, and there's billions of dollars at stake here. There's tons of money to be made in mandated vaccines all around the world. So they say that the WHO ought not to be in charge of these things. They ought not to be in charge of anything that's related to healthcare, at least certainly not in a mandatory or a binding way, because the WHO is not an independent body. It's not impartial. It's not uninterested. There's too much control by Big Pharma there. Another sort of kind of related point, Mr. Bridgen pointed out that the Geneva bureaucrats at the WHO pay no income tax. How does that relate? As diplomats working in Geneva, they're apparently, and I confirmed this with somebody I know who lives in Geneva, they're exempt from paying tax. So they're personally conflicted in the sense that they may bow to outside interests to keep their non-tax paying job. Apparently that comes under the Vienna Convention of 1961, if anybody's heard of that. So critics say that this transfer of power to the WHO, giving them the power to make all our healthcare laws, effectively creates an oligarchy. An oligarchy is when a small group of powerful, unaccountable people govern the affairs of a nation or a state, and usually they govern in their own self-interests. And Mr. Bridgen, another quote from Mr. Bridgen there is, "This is a huge power grab." The fourth concern is the WHO's track record. All the voices that are raised against the treaty and the international health regulations point to the past mistakes of the WHO, and I think some of the better known ones are, they said that COVID did not come from a lab leak, and that to say this was a conspiracy theory and was misinformation. But now the FBI and the US Senate and a lot of other groups that have looked into it have said that the lab leak theory is the most likely one. The WHO said that vaccines were necessary to stop transmission, but that's been proven false. And the WHO condemned the use of cheap off-patent drugs like ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, I think I said that right, to treat COVID, even though there are lots of anecdotal reports from professionals that those were effective medications. But Big Pharma could not profit from those cheap off-patent drugs, and so the WHO demonized them. And so they're not trustworthy because they are captured. So that's it for the four concerns, and that's it for my talk. Much more can be said, but just in conclusion, if Canada votes to adopt the WHO Treaty and the regulations, then the people's power to monitor their laws and challenge them and hold their lawmakers accountable is damaged or lost, and massive powers are transferred to an outside agency that is captured by Big Pharma. And our new Health Professions and Occupations Act is going to enable all this to come to pass in our province. Thank you.